Welcome to Davy's Take. Today we're talking about Wicked for Good, part 2 of the Wicked film adaptation. Yes, this is the second act of Wicked. If you've seen the musical, you know exactly what this film's going to be. And if you haven't seen the musical, I'm honestly curious what you think. I stated this in my Wicked review last year. I'm a huge fan of the musical. It's one of my favorite musicals ever. And I was really curious to see what they would do with part 2 of this story. Full transparency, I haven't seen the musical in like 15 years. So there are certain parts of the second act I kind of forgot about. I know the main plot points. I know the major things that happen in the second act and how everything wraps up. But I'll be honest, the little tiny details and sort of how the story flowed, I kind of forgot how that went. So a few months ago, I kind of read up on what fans sort of expected for this movie, what they think of the second act of the musical, people who are huge fans of the musical. And they basically said that the second act is weaker than the first, and that it has pacing issues and it has problems trying to shoehorn in certain things. Basically, everyone agreed that the first act was better than the second act. And honestly, that is something I kind of remembered when I saw the musical. But I was very curious to see what they would do with the second act because when you have a film, you have more freedoms to basically do what you want. And Wicked for Good is a mixed bag for me because the biggest issues with this film come from the story itself. So it's hard to critique this movie as a film because this film pretty much follows the musical beat for beat. They add a couple things, they expand on a few things. So when you view it from that standpoint, this is probably the best adaptation you'll probably ever get if you are just making an adaptation from the musical beat for beat. And that's where it gets frustrating for me because when you make a film version of this musical, there are things you could do. I'm not saying change anything. I'm not saying drastically alter what happens in the musical or in the story, but you have the opportunity to flesh out and expand certain things so that elements in this film feel a little more natural. The musical itself has an excuse. You can't have people sit in the theater for like 5 hours, but when you split this story into two parts, and you make the first film nearly 3 hours long, you could make the second film nearly 3 hours long and expand on some of the stuff that happens. Because I don't hate this film, I think it's totally fine. But the elements in this film, even with a film that's over 2 hours long, definitely feel rushed and shoehorned. And like I said before, most of the problems come from the story. So it's hard to blame the film for its problems. But the thing I will blame the film for is it did have the opportunity to maybe fix some of those problems. Like the story eventually ties into The Wizard of Oz. And I have to say, that becomes some of the weaker elements of this film. And I think there was a way where it didn't have to be that way. The story of Wicked really focuses on Elphaba and Glinda, their conflict, their character development, all that stuff. And it gets to the point with this film, with Wicked for Good, where it almost feels like that stuff becomes an afterthought. And they're almost collared into having to tie this into The Wizard of Oz. And it does feel like it's rushed. It feels like the film doesn't have enough time to really flesh out some of those elements, some of those characters, and some of those plot points that do connect to Wizard of Oz, which is bizarre because they could have made the film a little bit longer. And also, not to mention, we have another subplot where Glinda and Elphaba are fighting over Fiero, which it's in the musical. So, like, I can't blame the film for it, but it does make the film have really jarring tonal shifts. Like, there's a part in the film and in the musical, I guess, where a character is killed and it's pretty dark what happens, but then immediately afterwards, there's this cat fight, which again, it's in the musical, so it's hard to like blame the film for it, but it was just sort of tonally jarring to have this one thing happen and then immediately we're just whipping out like MCU type jokes. And look, like I said, I don't hate this film. I thought it was just fine. And I will die on this hill that this is probably the best adaptation you'll get if you are following the musical beat for beat. But there are things in this film that I did enjoy. I do like Cynthia Erivo as Elphaba. She is great here. Her singing is magnificent. Same with Ariana Grande as Glinda. Those two are the heart and soul of this film. That's why it gets frustrating when the film tries to distract from that. They try to focus on something else. And the movie looks colorful. The music's great, even though all the best musical numbers are in Act One. But that's the same thing with the real life musical. Like almost all of the iconic songs are in Act One. I think there's like two in Act Two that are iconic. There's like 20 in the first act. And I really love how the story wraps up. I loved it when I saw the musical, and I love it here. I think how the movie ends, they did a great job of adapting that. So I guess if you're a huge fan of Wicked, I'm curious to see what you think of this movie, because I know that there are diehard fans that just love that it is a beat for beat adaptation of the musical where they do expand a couple things. I know there were two songs that were added and whatnot. But I also saw a wave of fans of Wicked online that were a little frustrated because they love this story and they know that the story could be better if things were a little fleshed out in the second act. And this film had the opportunity to do that. But unfortunately, it just decided not to. Yeah, it's a little bit longer than what the second act is in real life, but it doesn't really use that extra runtime efficiently. I think they should have made the film a little bit longer to flesh out some of those elements to make things feel a little more natural and not like it was suffocating the movie. Overall, like I've been saying, I do think this is a worthy adaptation of the second act of the musical, but it could have been better. That's the reason why it's an adaptation. As a fan of the musical, as a fan of the movies, I did enjoy this, but is something where I was a little disappointed because I do think it could have been a little bit better. I'm going to give Wicked for Good 6.5 Davey Daves. I know they're thinking about making Wicked 3, which I have no idea what that story is. I haven't read the book. Maybe there's more there, but I seriously doubt it. I don't know. It just seems like desperate, in my opinion. So, whatever. So, Wicked for Good. Let me know what you guys thought of it. Once you've seen it, I'm curious to hear. And thank you so much for watching. Click here to see more of Davey's Takes.